The war hadn't started with fire. It started with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that follows the last breath in a room full of the dead. Somewhere above Earth's stratosphere, the Vorik's dominion finally gave up on treaties and signatures, casting away their diplomatic masks like cracked porcelain. They'd sent warnings, then ultimatums, then emissaries. But when all else failed, they sent the Therion. It arrived on wings of frozen ion and bioplasma, like a falling god made from nightmares. No one saw it at first. It seeded itself beneath cities' organic spores, creeping into sewers, soil, shadows. Then it hatched. One Caltherian per target zone. That's all it needed. No armies. No bombs. Just one dot. It moved in fog. In flickers. A silhouette carved from rot and instinct. And it didn't just kill. It remembered. If you screamed, as it gutted you, it screamed the same way the next night to lure your sister. If your blood had a certain rhythm, it mimicked it in the dark, whispering to survivors in your voice. It stored trauma, the way spiders store venom, in fangs waiting to pierce something soft. By the time it reached the outer rim of New Houston, 22,000 were dead, or ... worse. That's where Staff Sergeant Alia Gant entered the story. His team had been deployed to secure a secondary evacuation corridor. 8 Marines, all hardened, all experienced, all gone within 23 minutes. The camera feeds cut out one by one, their final frames showing glimpses of chitin, tongues like snapping cords, and the cold, glistening stalks of something, fungal wearing human bones like a cloak. Alaya was found 3 days later. He hadn't evacuated. He hadn't called in backup. He was discovered alone in the belly of a charred bunker, kneeling beside the Caltherian's twisted corpse. He was shirtless, covered in ichor and ash, and humming something low, something old, a lullaby maybe, or a hymn. The Caltherian had been split open from the inside, its torso ruptured, as if something inside had turned on it. Its claws were broken. Its tongue was gone. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were missing. The recon team approached carefully, rifles trained. One of them asked if he was injured. Alaya stood up slowly. Something clung to his chin. He looked like a man who had been weeping but not for himself. When asked what happened, he only said one thing. It tasted like burnt copper, ... and regret. He passed out before they could ask more. A week later, he woke in a military psych unit. They ran blood work. His vitals were stable. No infections, no known spores. But something was off. He kept asking for cooking materials, spices, an open flame. The official report labeled him mentally unstable. But the footage, once decrypted from his body cam, told a different story. Alaya had not killed the Caltherian in combat. He had eaten it alive, bite by bite, screaming the names of his fallen squad with every chew. And when it screamed back, mimicking them, he had chewed harder. Asterisk, they kept him underground. 2 miles beneath the Utah salt flats, where no signal could escape and no unauthorized eyes could stumble across what Earth's Defense Council had labeled a Category Black anomaly. Most thought Sergeant Alaya Gant was dead. The few who knew better insisted he should be, and the one man who'd seen the footage all the way through couldn't sleep without sedatives. Alaya sat alone in observation, cell 7, white walls glowing faintly under polarized lights. No bed, no mirror, no utensils. Nothing he could twist into a weapon. Nothing they thought he could use to hurt himself for someone else. But he didn't try. He sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing in rhythms too, even for someone in his situation. He barely spoke, unless someone brought him food. That's when things got strange. He wouldn't touch the meal unless he could prepare it himself. Not eat, prepare. He demanded access to a hot plate. They refused. He fasted for 4 days, drinking only water. On the 5th, they relented. The guards wheeled in a sanitized portable cooking unit, a simple induction burner with sterilized tongs and a ceramic pan. Alaya approached it like a priest at an altar. He opened the ration pack slowly, sniffed it, pinched off pieces. He mixed in nothing. Just rearranged, heated, stirred. Then he closed his eyes and ate. Not like a man starving, like a man tasting a memory. Dr. Priya Chaudhry watched from behind the one-way glass. She hadn't volunteered for this assignment, but they'd reassigned her from a xenonutrition research team when someone in command noticed her file. Civilian empathy markers, exceptionally high, the note said. They wanted someone who could see beyond the clinical, someone who could figure out if Alaya Gant was just a traumatized soldier, or something far more dangerous. She tapped the mic. Sergeant Gant. He didn't look up. Still not calling me Alaya. Professional boundaries. Fair enough. He poked the food again. This isn't it. Too clean. Too safe. What's it, exactly? He chewed for a moment, then looked up with eyes that had stared into something older than war. Grief meat. Dr. Chaudhry blinked. I'm sorry. You ever taste someone's last breath? He asked. Voice low, not unkind. There's something in it. Bitterness, fear, a metallic note of everything they never said. The Caltherian soaked that into its skin. When I bit into it, I tasted my team. She steadied her tablet. And that didn't disturb you? Alaya smiled. It anchored me. He wasn't insane. Not by any metric she understood. But there was something different about him now. Something in the way he could recall the names, ranks, quirks, and favorite meals of each soldier, lost in that final op. He didn't just remember them, he embodied them, as if ingesting that creature had turned him into a living archive. The Defense Council didn't want archives, they wanted weapons. On the third week of observation, they sent in Colonel Blake. Javert's a warhawk with a face like sun-scorched granite. He sat across from Alaya in the observation cell and laid out 3 photos. Cities, all in ruins. The Caltherian had begun spreading. There were now 5 confirmed creatures. No sign of a hive, no command structure. Just raw psychic slaughter spreading across human settlements. We think they're learning faster than expected, Havers said. They're remembering, copying, using people's memories against them. Alaya's brow furrowed. They always were. We just weren't listening. Then help us. The colonel leaned in. You're the only person who survived contact with one of those things. Not because you killed it, because you consumed it. Dr. Chaudhry flinched. The word echoed. I didn't eat it to win, Alaya said calmly. I ate it to remember. What we lost. What it stole. The colonel snorted. Whatever voodoo crap got you through that night, it's time to use it. We need a way to track them, to kill them, to stop this war from going full extinctionally. Alaya stared at the photo of the most recent ruin, Denver, a mile of silence. You're thinking about this all wrong, he muttered. You keep trying to fight the Caltherian, but they aren't here to fight us. They're here to haunt us. They feed off unresolved pain, memory. They weaponize the act of remembering. So, what's your solution? Havers snapped. Group therapy with flamethrowers. No, Alaya said, standing. I need meat. Dr. Chaudhry hesitated. You want Caltherian samples? He nodded once. Fresh, if possible, and a kitchen. I'll show you what fear tastes like when you marinate it in closure. They thought it was a metaphor, until the first sample arrived. And Alaya Gant, eyes gleaming with the hunger of purpose, began to cook what no sane species would ever touch. The containment bay trembled with the weight of what had just been wheeled in, even through 3 layers of reinforced biosafety barriers. The air shifted, thickened like the atmosphere knew it was in the presence of something unnatural. The Caltherian sample lay within a vacuum-sealed biochamber, its flesh still twitching, with residual nerve impulses. It looked like meat in the same way a shark looks like a pond fish, dense, black, glimmering with oil-slick iridescence. and still humming. Dr. Priya Chaudhry watched the techs run triple verification on the locks. They were sweating. 2 wore full body hazard suits. One crossed himself before stepping back. Jesus, one muttered. Why is it still warm? It's not warmth, the second tech replied. It's remembering. That's what it does. Across the room, Elijah Gant stood barefoot, stripped to his waist, eyes never leaving the box. He looked gaunt, but grounded, like a tree struck by lightning that somehow kept growing. There was a small scar under his left collarbone that hadn't been there before. No one asked about it. The director of Advanced Xenobehavioral Analysis stood beside Dr. Chaudhry. This is insane, he said under his breath. We're not feeding him alien horror meat just because he says it gives him visions. It's not visions, she replied, adjusting her notes. It's something else. Something we don't have words for yet. He grunted. We should just burn the damn thing. Elijah turned his head without warning. Then you burn the memories with it. There was a long silence. Open the chamber, Dr. Chaudhry said. The director opened his mouth to protest, but the command staff behind the glass nodded. They wanted results, no matter the risk. The locks hissed. The seal cracked. Elijah stepped forward with reverence, like a soldier approaching a battlefield memorial. The Caltherian tissue pulsed softly. It had once been part of something that could kill a tank with a scream, that had worn the last words of the dead like a second skin. And yet here it was, waiting on a cutting board. Elijah didn't flinch. He reached out and touched the flesh. The room went cold. Monitors behind the glass flickered. Electroencephalograms spiked. Security cams stuttered into static. Somewhere, deep within the fiber of that meat, something recognized him. Priya stepped forward. What do you feel? He didn't look up. Pain, rage, children crying in basements, men whispering prayers through broken teeth, a woman humming while bleeding out under a bed frame. It's all still in here, she swallowed. And you still want to eat it? No, he said, picking up a scalpel. I need to. He sliced off a piece with the precision of a surgeon. As it came free, the lights surged. Somewhere in the building, a generator failed. The kitchen they'd built was behind triple-sealed partitions, fitted with every kind of air filter, purifier, and neutralizing spray Earth's military science could design. Still, it reeked of ozone and rust as the alien flesh met the pan. He didn't use oil, he used tears. The salt water came from a vial he carried on his belt drawn from his own eyes, collected over nights of silent weeping in the psych unit. What the hell is he doing? Whispered the director. He's cooking grief, Priya answered, watching with morbid awe. He's trying to digest what killed us. The Caltherian strip sizzled. The skin blistered. Blackened threads curled, and released bursts of vapor, each laced with chemical signatures, known only to the fallen. The scent made several observers in the viewing room stagger. One cried, one vomited, but Elijah kept going. He added a spice mixture, nothing fancy, just salt, crushed pepper, paprika, and a splash of vinegar. Every choice symbolic: salt for tears, pepper for fire, paprika for the blood, vinegar for the acid bite of remembering. When the meat was done, he placed it on a plain metal plate. Then he sat, prayed, not to God, but to the names. Private Mitchell, Specialist Rami, Lieutenant Owens, Captain Song. Each name, a bite. He didn't chew like a man consuming food. He chewed like a man burying ghosts. Each swallow was a eulogy. Each pause, a funeral. And then something strange happened. The alien meat began to change in his hands, not biologically, but perceptually. Priya watched as it shimmered, then solidified, became less horrifying, more real, understandable. It no longer looked like cosmic terror. It looked like a smoked flank cut from a particularly nasty-looking boar. The trauma had been transformed. Elijah looked up. His eyes weren't wild. They were clear. They're not just bioweapons. he said softly. They're memorials. What do you mean? Priya whispered. They absorb our memories, right? But no one asked what happens when we consume them. When we reverse the cycle. He stood, taller now, straighter, as if the grief had settled into his bones, no longer gnawing from the inside. You wanted to know how to fight the Caltharian, he said. I just did. The director blinked. You didn't do anything. You just ate. Alaya smiled. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't kind. It was understanding. I turned terror into tenderness, he said. They give us pain. We give it back. Cooked, he held out the plate. And against every regulation, against every protocol and instinct, Priya Chaudhry took a bite. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, she remembered her brother's voice without hearing him scream. They came to see him cook. At first, it was just the scientists' white coats and nervous hands, clipboards trembling as they watched Staff Sergeant Alia Gant methodically trim another slab of Caltharian meat, treating it with the delicacy of a chef preparing a last meal for an emperor. Then came the psychologists, then the brass, then, quietly, people who had lost someone. They were kept behind blast-proof glass. Cameras recorded everything. Subdermal bioscanners ran across Alaya's skin constantly. No one trusted what they were witnessing, because what they were witnessing shouldn't have been possible. Every time Alaya cooked a new Caltharian cut, something changed. In him, in the meat, in the room. No longer was it just alien tissues spitting fear pheromones into the air. It became something else. Something familiar. Like war stories told over fire. Like eulogies carved into spice and heat. But it wasn't just taste. Dr. Priya Chaudhry realized it after her third meal. The Caltharian meat induced a neural echo. After digestion, she could remember every detail of her brother's laugh, not the recording, the real one, the one he used when he beat her at chess in 6th grade, the one that had died in silence when the Caltharian swept through Busan. Alaya said the meat was memory-charged. Priya called it sympathetic digestion. Others just called it madness. Still, the line to get into Observation Bay 7 grew, longer every day, and somewhere deep beneath their amazement, fear began to grow in the Pentagon's hallways like mold behind wallpaper. Because if eating Caltharian meat helped process grief, what would happen if the public got a taste? The answer came in a classified leak. No one ever figured out how it happened. One encrypted data stream. One smuggled slice of preserved meat. One underground video. The footage showed Alia in the kitchen, cooking what he called the memory kata, strip of Caltharian sinew laced with pain signature compounds. The video went viral in 24 hours. He didn't say much in the clip. Just worked quietly. Poured marinade across the flesh. Whispered names. Folded his grief into the sizzling oil like it was sacred. Then, at the end, he looked at the camera and said, "You want vengeance? Eat it." The world changed. Bootleg Caltharian cuts started circulating through the black market. Grief-ridden parents traded them like relics. Veterans began forming ritual cooking groups. Therapy clinics requested classified recipes. One young widow in Kansas claimed that, after eating her first bite, she dreamed of her husband again, but smiling this time. Earth's government panicked. They dispatched control teams to intercept every leak, confiscated cooking gear, erased forums, declared Caltharian consumption a Class 1 containment breach. But it was too late. The grief eaters had already begun to organize. They called themselves the fork-bound veterans, survivors, widows, orphans, people with nothing left but rage and a knife. And they weren't content with just healing. They were learning. It turned out Alaya was right. The Caltharian were memory predators, yes, but they had no defenses for being remembered back. Each bite gave insight, hunting patterns, behavioral maps. Weaknesses. They hadn't just turned trauma into closure. They were now turning closure into tactical intelligence. Priya compiled the reports with growing horror. 1. Fork-bound chapter in Morocco had taken down an active Caltherian hive using only rebar, cooking torches, and vinegar mist. Another in Brazil claimed to have sautéed one to death. This isn't revenge, Alaya told her one night. It's reclamation. They thought they were feeding on our fear, but now we're feeding on theirs. It wasn't metaphor anymore. The Caltherians started to flee across colonies. Their patterns changed. Where once they stalked like apex predators, now they avoided human settlements entirely. They stopped mimicking voices. They retreated into old hive tunnels, silent, confused, because for the first time in their engineered existence, the prey had acquired a taste for them. Alaya sat alone after a long session, his apron soaked, his hands calloused. A plate of seared Caltherian flank cooled before him. It bore the taste of a town called Ashbridge, a place erased from the map. He didn't eat, he just stared at it. Priya entered. You okay? No, he whispered, but I'm getting closer. To what? He looked up. To tasting what my squad felt before they died. I want to understand it, so I can finish what they started. Priya swallowed. And what is that? He turned toward the dark, toward the memory of monsters who had built their empire on the silence of the dead, turning horror into hunger. Then he picked up the fork and took another bite. The fire pits burned in silence, not the kind born of peace, but the kind that comes after a storm when the wind has carried off the screaming and left behind only ash and memory. On the outskirts of the ruined Colorado territory, once called Denver, now just scorched stone and echo. A crowd gathered beneath the open sky. They came not with weapons, but with cutting boards. They didn't carry war banners, but spatulas and spice jars. This was not a battlefield. This was a feast of the fallen. 1,000 humans encircled the smoldering heart of a city that had once held 3 million souls. Now there were only craters, skeletal buildings, and the blood-stained memories of a Caltherian hive that had nested in the very bones of the earth. It had been burned out last week by civilians. No military strike, no orbital weapon, just the fork-bound and their doctrine. We do not run, we cook what comes. The lead fire pit was built from melted car frames. Rebar formed a crosshatch above it, holding the skewers in place. The meat sizzled in the flame. Caltherian flank, shoulder, rump, even the tongue meticulously sliced into thin ribbons and dusted with cracked pepper and coriander. Every dish bore a name, not the name of the food, the name of someone lost. Alaya Gant moved between the stations in silence, no longer the subject of classified experiments, no longer the madman beneath the salt flats. Now, he was something more. Something ... elemental. He wore no armor, no insignia, just a dark apron, a scarred face, and hands that trembled not with fear, but reverence. Dr. Priya Chaudhary walked beside him. She hadn't planned to be here, but when she heard that Alaya was holding a grief cook in the ruins, she left the UN research station mid-shift and flew across 3 time zones, because this was where it was happening now. The real war. Do you smell it? Alaya said. Priya closed her eyes. The scent wasn't just meat and smoke. It was grief distilled, charred bone and sorrow, but also rosemary, bay leaves, lemon zest. Someone was brushing butter and garlic across a Caltherian spinal cut. This is hallowed ground now, he said. Every time they try to take a piece of us, we give them back culture, ritual, flavor. She watched the people gather in quiet groups, widows, children, ex-soldiers, each preparing a dish tied to a memory. Some were crying as they seasoned. Others were laughing broken, jagged laughs that still held life. I had a nightmare, Alaya said. 2 nights ago, I saw one of the Caltherian queens, bigger than anything we've seen. It spoke through my mother's voice. Priya tensed. Another memory echo. No, it wasn't remembering her. It was using my memory. It reached into me. It mimicked love, comfort, tried to weaponize what kept me going. What did you do? I fed it. She looked at him, eyes widening. In the dream, he continued, I invited it to dinner. I laid out a plate of its own kind, grilled and seasoned. It screamed, not because I heard it, because I understood it, because I stripped away the fear, and left only taste. That's what it can't survive. Priya turned back to the feast. And if others saw what we're doing here, they'll think we're mad, Elias said, until they taste it. Someone struck a bell, an old bicycle, rim hanging from the remains of a bus stop. The feast began, one by one. The people stepped forward, plates in hand, stories on their tongues. Each person told the name of who they were cooking for. Each bite was sacred. A mother with a trembling lip whispered, my son always hated spicy food, so I made this extra hot, just to annoy him. A soldier said, my captain loved fried rice. This is close, sort of. Caltharian isn't easy to stir-fry, but I tried. A child barely old enough to speak said, this is for my grandma. She used to hum when she cooked, so I hummed the whole time. The Caltharian flesh smoked, sizzled, softened. It's biochemical. Warfare, its very structure designed to unnerve and unmake the human mind, was being rewritten, rebound in salt and marinade, neutralized not by science, but by intent. 100 years of war strategy failed to account for one truth. No, one fights harder than someone who cooks their dead with love. From the ridge overlooking the ruins, a Vorex scout ship recorded the scene in confusion. The captain's tendrils twitched in disbelief. There, consuming the nightmare. No, sir, the analyst whispered, nearly in tears. They're transforming it. On Earth, Elias stepped onto the platform, a plate in his hands. A single cut of meat, blackened, tender, glistening with tears and vinegar. This, he said, is for Corporal Dion Owens, my best friend, the first to fall. He liked his steak well done and hated mushrooms. So I added mushrooms, because he can't stop me now. The crowd chuckled softly, then fell still. He died screaming, and I remember the sound. But when I bit into this, he raised the fork. I heard him laughing, and for the first time since the attack, I laughed too. He took the bite, and the crowd took theirs. As the firelight danced in the air filled with salt and sorrow and story, the Caltharian in orbit watching, listening, realized something. This was not war. This was evolution. A species that eats what kills them, and then builds community around the flavor. Cannot be conquered. Elia chewed, and the war shifted. Asterisk, asterisk, they named it Caltharian Prime, but the humans would later call it the Choir of Endings. It descended in silence, no streaks of fire, no planetary warnings. One moment the air over the Cascadian range was still, and the next, the sky tore open like a curtain ripped from the heavens. The creature stood 3 stories tall, its form a tapestry of past deaths, bone lattice from soldiers in Eastern Europe, skin etched with whispers from Brazilian screams, teeth stolen from the fallen of Beijing, voices harvested from every battlefield. It had ever left cold and silent. The Prime did not stalk or sneak. Like its lesser brethren, it arrived. Every human who stood within a 5-mile radius dropped to their knees, not from pain, from memory, because the Prime didn't attack. It spoke with every voice it had ever consumed. Children heard their dead fathers call their names. Widows heard long-lost I love yous. Priya Chaudhry, watching from a mobile UN outpost, clutched her tablet so tightly it cracked. On the screen, the creature stood unmoving in the heart of a crater. Its arrival had flattened an old logging town, but it hadn't killed anyone yet. Instead, it sang a chorus of human sorrow, a symphony of memory. Thousands watched through remote feeds, through emergency drones. Millions would see the replays. It was not just an invasion. It was psychological reclamation. The Prime wanted Earth to drown in its own grief. No claws, no plasma, just the unbearable weight of remembered agony. They called Alaya Gant. He was already on the move, in a convoy of rusted-out food trucks repurposed into mobile war kitchens. He and the Forkbound cut through the night. They moved in silence, firewood, in crates, cast iron sizzling in anticipation. There were no guns, just knives honed to emotional razors and spice blends engineered to neutralize fear markers. As the convoy reached the outskirts of the Prime's crater, the creature turned. It saw him. Alaya Gant stepped forward. Alone, he wore a black apron stitched with names. Every name a ghost he had fed to the fire. His eyes were calm, his hand steady. The Prime hissed. Its body fractured and reformed into a dozen fallen forms, mothers, lovers, enemies, all speaking in perfect unison. Why do you feast on pain? Why do you devour the dead? Why do you turn memory into hunger? Alaya planted his smoker grill in the middle of the crater, opened it with a hiss. The scent of slow-cooked Caltharian rose into the night like incense to a forgotten god. I don't feast on pain, he said, voice low but carrying. I redeem it. He reached into the grill, pulled out a slab of Caltharian flank soaked in vinegar, ginger, soy, and crushed cloves. He sliced it with a practiced flick of his wrist, laid it on a plate. The Prime trembled. You mock the dead. No, Alaya said. You do. You wear their voices like a costume. I carry their flavor in my chest. Every bite I take, I'm closer to them. You turned them into weapons. I turned them into family recipes. Priya watched from the command truck. Is it reacting? She asked the analyst. The tech stammered, voice tight with awe. Its pheromones are destabilizing. It's afraid. Because Alaya didn't just eat the Caltharian. He understood them. He had studied their nerve endings, marinated their musculature, tested their reactions to citrus, smoke, and sea salt. And in doing so, he discovered something more powerful than bullets. Compassion served on a plate? The Prime roared. 1,000 voices screaming in unison. The crater cracked, trees splitting like matchsticks, the sky itself trembling. Alaya stood unflinching. He held the plate high. Then, with deliberate reverence, he took a bite. Steam curled from the meat. His eyes fluttered. The memory rushed in, not just of his squad, but of a girl in Arkansas who lost her father, of a nurse in Ghana who burned alone to save children, of names he didn't know, but carried now in flavor. He swallowed. They weren't yours to keep, he said. You stole their endings. But now we write the final chapter. The Forkbound stepped into the clearing, 100 strong. They lit fires. One by one, the pits ignited. Smokers belched. Skewers sizzled. The night filled with the sound of knives on bone, hands brushing marinades into flesh. Laughter tinged with tears. The Caltharian Prime buckled. It had no strategy for this. No defense against shared memory. No armor against ritual healing. It was engineered for death, but humans had turned death into dinner. It lashed out telepathic, tendrils flaring across the minds of the Forkbound, and then it made its final mistake. It reached for Alaya's memories. For Owens, for Mitchell, for Song. But Alaya had already fed those ghosts, had seasoned his sorrow. His mind was not a battlefield. It was a kitchen. It was sacred. And the Prime, upon tasting it, wept. Not with sound, but with release. It collapsed, dead, but undone. Its body faded, unwound into dust and voice, vanishing into the air. No explosion, no roar. Just the gentle sound of embers crackling. Alaya stood still, then turned to the waiting crowd. It's over, he said. Someone began to sob. Someone else began to laugh. The grills hissed. The meal continued. and the greatest weapon ever built by the Vorax Dominion vanished beneath a sky that smelled of smoke, rosemary, and closure. But not before it whispered one last question. If you can eat your pain, what else will you consume? You said, start. With Chapter 7 more unique and lengthy and more interesting and more suspense and more powerful storylines, ChatGPT said. The Vorax didn't sleep. They did not dream. They did not eat. Their species had evolved beyond consumption millennia ago, relying on crystalline energy matrices and neural fusion to sustain their bite. Taste was a concept relegated to their pre-sentient past. Emotion, a flaw overcome. Their society was built on order, hierarchy, and cold, strategic domination, which is why the Caltharian Prime's collapse triggered the largest panic cascade in Vorax history. Across the Dominion, war councils collapsed into arguments. Tactical AI cores entered recursive loops and shut down. Fleet masters screamed into subspace channels, demanding an explanation no one could give. Because the data was clear. The humans hadn't just defeated the Prime. They had digested it and broadcast the whole thing on 6 human news networks and 14 fork-bound live streams in high definition, with multiple camera angles, with captions. One clip alone had gone viral across Earth's net space. Elia Gant, standing beside a smoldering pit, holding a perfectly seared Caltharian flank, his voice calm, almost gentle. The taste of fear is bitter, but when you smoke, it's slow, ... It softens. That's when it surrenders. The Vorax called an emergency summit aboard the High Mind Citadel, an impossible sphere of metal and mind orbiting the dead star Rehaxel. Inside, 1,000 minds convened. Thought forms clashed in silent argument, exchanging data at speeds no human could comprehend, but none of it made sense. A pre-combat ethicist dared speak aloud, they're metabolizing trauma into strength. A xenogeneticist whispered, they're sharing emotional neurosignatures through culinary rituals. It's viral, a mimetic plague of togetherness. An old warlord, his chrome skin etched with 100 victory runes, slammed the table. They are primitive. How are they winning? No one answered. Then a soft voice, high in the shadows of the council dome, broke the silence. It was the grand strategist. Because we misunderstood them, she said. We believed consumption was base, a survival function, but to them consumption is sacred. They do not eat to survive. They eat to remember, to forgive, to love. Another warlord sneered. We gave them nightmares. No, the strategist said coldly. We gave them ingredients. Back on Earth, the fires had not dimmed. Elia Gant stood atop a scaffold, overlooking what had once been a military base in Arizona. Now, it was something else. The Hearth, a permanent settlement founded by the Forkbound. It wasn't a fortress. It was a kitchen, sprawling smokehouses, community tables longer than trucks, glass walls etched with names of the dead, open fire pits burned day and night, metalian and otherwise rotated slowly over coals, basted with oil and sorrow. Thousands gathered. Some came to mourn. Some came to learn. Some came to taste something that might help them feel again. Priya Chaudhry walked with Elia along the main courtyard, where a group of children were laughing while trying to make Caltharian dumplings. One of them, Bryn, a refugee from the eastern zone, waved at Elia, flowers smeared across his face. We call this the memory mix. The boy shouted. Elia smiled. A man who had once devoured a god of death now found peace watching a child roll dough over grief. But it wasn't all healing. There were whispers that something worse was coming, that the Vorax wouldn't make the same mistake twice. One night, a single drone fell from the sky, smashing into the courtyard. No explosives, no toxins, just a recording. A voice, the grand strategist. You teach your people to feast on monsters. But what happens when the monsters are your own? What will you eat when there's no enemy left but yourselves? The recording ended with coordinates. A challenge. Deep space. A Vorex stronghold. A place no human had ever entered. And lived. Alia said nothing for a full day. He didn't sleep. He walked the kitchens, touched the knives, tasted the smoke. Finally at dawn, he met with the fork-bound council leaders from every continent. Survivors, chefs, memory bearers. We go, he said, not with guns, not with fleets. What then? Priya asked. Alaya lifted a wooden crate, inside cuts of Caltharian prime, seasoned, labeled, each one marked with a name. We bring the one thing they never prepared for, he said. Dinner. The plan was madness. To cook inside the Vorex core systems. To hold a communal meal where conquest was born. To show the galaxy that humans didn't just survive extinction, they fed on it and grew stronger. They called it the Last Supper. The mission was coded under Project Communion, and every ship that left Earth carried not warheads, but recipes. Asterisk, asterisk, the stars above the Vorex stronghold did not twinkle. They pulsed, black light and angular. Silence bled across space, folding around the monstrous geometry of Vexcal Prime, the heart of the Vorex dominion. It was not built. It was grown a living hive world, half machine, half brain, and all malice. No ship had ever approached its perimeter without being vaporized in an instant. No species had dared to dot until now. A human fleet arrived, not in formation, but in a procession. Hundreds of retrofitted freighters and civilian vessels, cobbled together from refugee scrapyards and back-alley garages. The ships were not painted in battle gray, but in smoke-brown steel, marked not with insignias but menus, scrawled in chalk, etched in wood, lit up in neon. The flagship, once a mining tug called the Saltfire, led the way. On its hull, 3 words had been hand-carved into a steel plate. We remember hungry. Inside the Saltfire, Elia Gant stared into the smoker. He was alone in the galley, lit only by the red glow of coals. He had spent the past 2 weeks preparing this moment. Not just the food, though, that mattered, but the memory. Every herb, every oil, every wood chip soaked in the names of the dead. Each recipe, a eulogy. Each spice, a legacy. Each dish, a declaration. He turned as the ship AI chirped. Arrival at Vexcal Prime in 30 seconds. Defensive grid, ... silent. Elia nodded. The fork-bound were not coming for war. They were coming for reconciliation. And nothing terrified the Vorex more. On the observation deck, Priya Chaudhry monitored the transmission scans. Vorex defense systems remained dormant. Not powered down, stunned. Surveillance drones hovered in tight rings, analyzing, broadcasting across 1,000 Dominion sectors. They're watching, she said, almost to herself. Elia entered behind her. He wore his dark apron. His hands were stained with turmeric and bloodroot. He smelled of char, honey, and ash. I hope they're hungry, he replied. Then, with no announcement, the Saltfire began transmitting. Not a threat, not a demand, a cooking show. Every ship in the human fleet switched to broadcast mode. Cameras came online. Chefs some trained, most not stepped into their makeshift galleys. One by one, they began cooking. The Dominion saw flame-seared Caltharian, ribs dusted with garlic and chili powder. They saw bone-thin mothers, teaching orphans how to fold grief into dumplings. They saw priests roasting memory cuts over mesquite fires, while whispering names of the dead, like prayers. And then, they saw Alia. He looked directly into the lens. Hello, he said. We've brought dinner. He lifted a plated dish, blackened flank, marinated in fig and ash vinegar, a sprig of rosemary, hand-picked from the earth that had once cradled the fallen. Everything we lost is here. The feed reached the high mind. Inside the core mind chamber of Vexcal Prime. The Grand Strategist stood with her advisors, her chrome body humming with conflicting data. They are offering food, a warlord whispered, confused. No, she said. They are offering grace. Outside, landing bays opened. The humans descended. Fork-bound squads moved with reverent precision, hauling food carts and long tables, setting them up in a courtyard made of bone glass and regret. They laid out meals like relics. They lit candles made from Caltherian fat, and when they sat, they left one seat open at every table. The Dominion watched, unsure. Trillions of viewers, across thousands of systems. The act was so foreign, so disarming, that it made every combat algorithm stall. Priya sat beside Alaya. "They're not going to come," she said. "They will," he replied, slicing brisket with a steady hand, "because they're starving." And then it happened. The first Vorex stepped forward, small, hesitant, young. Its spindly limbs twitched as it approached the table. No armor, no weapon, just curiosity. Alaya smiled. He handed over a plate. The Vorex sniffed it, then tasted. It staggered. The room lit with a pulse from its core. Every other Vorex in the chamber felt the memory. It tasted not just meat. It tasted love. Salt from tears shed over a dead daughter. Fire from anger reborn as protection. Sweetness from forgiveness baked into the marrow. The strategist staggered backward. What is this weapon?" she whispered. Alaya's voice came over the feed. "It's not a weapon," he said. "It's a meal, and meals are meant to be shared." A second Vorex stepped forward, then a third. Within an hour, the courtyard was full. No blood spilled, no screams, only the clinking of plates, the murmur of stories, the breaking of ancient silences. They called it the Communion of Ends. It marked the first time in galactic history that a war was not ended by force, but by flavor. And as the Vorex tasted, grief transformed into nourishment, fear melted into flavor, and memory became legacy. They began to understand. Humans didn't fight monsters by being stronger. They invited them to dinner, and changed what they were. The galaxy held its breath, not in horror, but in confusion. It had been 3 standard days since the humans cooked inside Vexcal Prime. 3 days since the species most feared across 7 spiral arms sat down at tables made from old ship plating and ate with their enemies. 3 days since fire, once used only to destroy, became the means of communion, and in those 3 days, nothing made sense anymore. Not to the Vorex, not to the Dominion, and especially not to the outer civilizations, who'd once prayed they wouldn't be next, because every Vorex transmission following the Communion of Ends was the same. What else do you serve? Across fractured systems, in empires where power was worshipped and cruelty enforced, a ripple of uncertainty spread, because humans had just demonstrated something no species had accounted for. They did not just absorb trauma, they cooked it. They served it, and they grew stronger every time they shared it. Inside the newly renamed Galactic Hearth, formerly the war throne of the Vorex, Alaya Gant stood before the main fire pit, his fingers dusted with bone pepper, his apron marked with old grief and new hope. Priya Chowdhury watched him from the gallery above, arms crossed, brows knit. She no longer recorded notes. There was no longer a project to observe. There was only a future unfolding. One meal at a time. "We're being watched by 12 different races," she said quietly into her comlink. "They're not hostile, just ... watching." Alaya nodded. He was plating what he called the victory. Stew, made from leftover Caltherian heart meat, slow braised with root vegetables grown in reclaimed craters. Each batch simmered for 24 hours, and was stirred every hour by a different survivor. "You know what I realized," he said, never looking up. "They thought we were fractured, disorganized, weak, but all they ever saw was our politics, our anger. They never saw the one place we always come together." Priya tilted her head. "Where's that?" He ladled a portion of stew into a thick ceramic bowl. The aroma curled into the air like a whispered prayer. "A dinner table." Then, he looked up. The only place where no matter what you've been through, you eat next to someone who knows your story without needing to ask. On the edge of the galaxy, another Vorex offshoot watched the broadcast in silence. The images of humanity's food ceremonies had become the most consumed content in their databanks. They began experimenting. First with simulation, then with taste. One Vorex bioanalyst consumed a protein sample infused with a memory fragment from a human funeral. It sobbed for 6 hours, and then asked for more. Meanwhile, new factions, old enemies began reaching out. Small races long silenced by the Dominion's power now asked Earth for recipes, not weapons, not ships, just a chance to learn how to cook. They're monsters, because somewhere in the twisted logic of grief and fire, humanity had discovered a philosophy stronger than war, a culinary ideology. In San Cristobal, a man who'd lost his legs to a Caltharian raid opened a food truck called the Grief Grill. In Tokyo, a Michelin-starred chef held a tasting course called Eulogy Tasting Menu. In Africa, an entire tribe rebuilt their village around a sacred pit fire, feeding strangers first, asking questions second. They didn't burn flags anymore. They grilled over them, and they planted herbs in the ashes. Back aboard the Saltfire, Elia received a transmission. It wasn't in words, it was a box. Inside it something no one expected. A frozen sample of flesh. Not Caltharian, not engineered. This was Vorex, that their own. A piece of themselves. A note carved into the container. In imperfect Terran common, we want to understand what you taste in us. Elia set it gently on the prep table. The room grew silent. This is it, Priya whispered. He nodded. I thought we were cooking to remember, Elia said. But maybe we're cooking to connect. He opened the box. The meat shimmered with bioluminescence. Reactive enzymes danced along the muscle fibers. It smelled of copper and salt and something else. Loneliness. Elia prepped it in silence. No music, no audience, just him and the fire. He did not season it with bitterness. He used rosemary, thyme, olive oil, pressed by refugees who had come to Earth with nothing but seeds in their pockets. He rubbed it down with lemon, a touch of honey. Then he slow-cooked it, basted it, turned it with care. Not as a challenge, but as a welcome. When it was ready, he plated it, took a small bite. He closed his eyes, and what he tasted wasn't war. It wasn't conquest. It was a child, alone, frightened, grown into a species that had forgotten comfort, forgotten flavor, forgotten the idea of being fed by something other than fear. He opened his eyes and whispered to the Vorex, watching through their hidden feeds. There's room at the table. Because in that moment, humanity wasn't just turning enemies into meals. They were turning meals into forgiveness. The smoke rose, not as a signal of war, but as the final hymn of a war that had redefined what victory meant. Earth's skies, once marred by burning cities and invasion alarms, now shimmered with aurora-like streaks of gold and crimson. A gift from the Forkbound's orbital grills, a massive satellite lattice designed not for weapons, but for slow-roasting remembrance. From orbit, Earth didn't look like a battleground anymore. It looked like a planet preparing for a festival, for a funeral, for a homecoming. In every city, fire pits burned, some in silence, others in celebration, but all with purpose. It had been 30 days since Elia Gant took his first bite of Vorex flesh, 30 days since the galaxy learned something terrifying. Humanity had stopped fighting, and the Vorex had started cooking. It began as an experiment, a preparation of the gifted Vorex metameal. He called the first welcome was live-streamed across a dozen systems. No declarations, no threats. Just a man, a fire, and a plate. He chewed slowly, like he was listening to the food. When he swallowed, the Vorex collective received something they had never known. Understanding. Not the kind mined from data, but the kind felt the warmth of belonging, the sting of being known. the sweetness of being remembered. And it broke them. Not in the way the Vorex feared no rebellion, no civil war, but in the way fire breaks raw wood into coals. They came, one by one, in ships unarmed, and wings folded in surrender. They arrived at Earth, not with demands, but with questions. What does courage taste like? How do you season sorrow? Can you teach us to feed ourselves without devouring others? The answer was yes, but it wasn't easy. There were protests, riots. Not everyone on Earth was ready to forgive. A group in London hurled bricks at a Vorex emissary carrying herbs grown in soil seeded with Caltharian bone ash. In New Manila, a fork-bound veteran broke down, sobbing while teaching a young Vorex how to knead dough, screaming, "You don't get to touch this. You took everything." But the emissary simply said, "Then teach me, so I know what not to take again." Because forgiveness, like cooking, takes time. Alaya Gant was tired, not from battle but from grieving the grief. He stood in front of the largest fire pit Earth had ever built, the hearth eternal, nestled deep in the canyons of Arizona. A fire the size of a house. A pit fueled by wood from forests grown in regrowth zones, fed by the hands of survivors from all over the world. He turned the spit slowly. The meat glistened. Vorx flank, tenderized in citrus, brined for 72 hours, and glazed with a reduction of Caltharian marrow and basil. He had never called himself a hero, or a leader, or a chef, but today he would feed the galaxy. Ships circled overhead. Thousands of guests, Salian and human, waited in lines that stretched across the desert. Behind him, Priya Chowdhury adjusted her apron. She had changed, too. No longer the quiet researcher. Now she wore a sash of linen across her chest, embroidered with spice recipes and old names. She taught classes now in flavor chemistry, grief therapy, and empathy through cuisine. "A lot," she said softly. "They're ready." He looked at the crowd. They weren't soldiers. They were people, hungry, broken, healing. "We once thought the war would end when they surrendered," he said. A hush fell over the canyon. "But that's not how it ends. It ends when we stop being defined by what hurt us and start choosing what we make of it." He sliced the roast, held it high. "Today, we serve not to forget, but to remember. Every name we lost, every scar we carry, every soul they thought they could erase is in this meal." He handed the first plate to a child, a Vorex. Child. Tiny, quiet, shaking, but not from fear, from hunger. She took it in both hands, looked up. "Will it change me?" He knelt. "It already has." And then the line moved. One by one, fork-bound refugees, Vorex, alien merchants, wounded soldiers, scientists, children of the fallen, all came forward and took a piece of something once designed to end humanity and now offered to nourish it. A new saying emerged from that day, not born in a speech or treaty, but in the muttered reverent words passed from plate to plate. "We feed what tries to kill us, until it remembers it was hungry for something else." Across the galaxy, something unthinkable happened. The Caltharians ceased to exist, not wiped out, but absorbed. Their DNA repurposed into sustainable food sources. Their psychological terror banks turned into tastes libraries, teaching species how to remember safely. There, death echoes, filtered through neural cuisine and turned into music, art, story, spice, and the Vorex. They disbanded the Dominion, not because of defeat, but because they no longer knew what war was for. Peace wasn't negotiated, it was catered. An earth-scarred, reckless, stubborn earthbake came not the galaxy's conqueror, but its cook. Final scene. Alaya Gant sits alone under the stars. A campfire crackles beside him. He eats slowly from a bowl made from Caltharian skull bone, now polished smooth. He's older now, tired but peaceful. Priya arrives with a fresh flask of aged soju and 2 cups. They sit, they drink, they share the silence. And when Priya finally asks, "Do you think we'll ever stop needing to do this?" Elias stirs the fire. "No," he says, "because there's always something new to taste." He lifts his bowl to the dead. Priya clinks her cup to the ones who made us hungry enough to remember. And far above them, a satellite blinks to life, broadcasting to the stars. Earth invites you to dinner. Bring your wounds, we'll bring the fire.